Hello and welcome to another episode of The State of Politics. Myself and Patrick today are joined by journalist, commentator, and all-round good guy, Kevin McKenna. Kevin, how you doing?
Hello, chaps. Doing very well. Lovely day through here. Sorry I couldn't be with you in person, but that Afghanistan situation means I've got to be alert to write whatever I'm required to.
Yeah, obviously it's a quick moving situation, so I'm sure you're on call constantly and ready to get into it. With that, obviously, been a journalist for a long time. In situations like this, how close do you need to pay attention to news and just try and keep yourself in the loop? And how do you keep yourself in the loop with stuff like this just now?
Well, when it comes to things to do with Afghanistan, Scotland, the Scottish journalism crew are quite blessed because we've got a reporter called David Pratt, who's probably one of the world's top foreign correspondents, and David's all over this. He's been going to Afghanistan intermittently over the years, as well as quite a lot of the world's other trouble spots, and his reporting and his analysis of this has been different class. And I've been reading a lot of David's stuff just over many years. He was a much valued colleague when I once worked in the Sunday Herald, and so having someone like him describing these events and predicting a lot of what we're actually seeing comes in handy to journalists like me who occasionally might be asked to provide our own analysis on it. And yeah, there's loads of news. There's 24/7 news across all sorts of platforms on which we can form opinions, but it's good to have somebody like David to bounce ideas off and just to keep informed about what's happening.
Just sort of touching on sort of going back to the start, growing up, can you remember what was the first political event that you can remember growing up, and did you have any sort of political heroes or idols or people that you sort of respected growing up looking at the political world?
The first major kind of political event, I suppose the first thing that got me involved in left-wing politics was as a child watching the BBC's coverage of apartheid in South Africa in the late 60s. For many people at that time, their ignorance, or rather their knowledge of what was happening in South Africa to Black people and the apartheid regime was very, very sketchy. And the BBC, to be fair to them, had a series of groundbreaking reports that brought into a lot of British people's front rooms for the first time the reality and the ugliness and the brutality of that regime. And I remember it had quite a profound effect on me. I also remember my dad letting me stay up to watch the 1974 general election, which Labour won when Harold Wilson was the Prime Minister, became the Prime Minister. And that was the first time that I'd had kind of, he kind of outlined to me what the British electoral system was and the broad differences between Labour and the Conservatives and what Labour stood for. He was a card-carrying Labour Party member and a trade unionist. So when it came to the 79 general election, which brought us Thatcher, I was kind of fairly well versed in how politics was working in this country, and also, what what was likely to happen, the sort of forces that were driving conservatism at the time. And then, fast forward to 1984, the miners' strike, and by that time I was at university, and that, I suppose, was a kind of quite a radical event in my political formation. Not only the actual struggle of the miners over that year between 1984 and 1985, but also how they were being portrayed on the BBC and in the press, and a lot of the, was even then, although I was by no means a sophisticated analyst or interpreter of these events, it was quite clear that there was a multi-platformed effort to demonize the miners and to demonize trade unions, and there were very few questions being asked about why this was so. And it was equally depressing to see how few of the senior Labour people at the time were backing the miners. And then, subsequently, years later, there was a great book by the journalist Seamus Milne, who went on to become the kind of press man, main assistant of Jeremy Corbyn. So Seamus wrote this book called The Enemy Within, which basically revealed and exposed the extent to which the British state connived at undermining the miners' struggle, how they had made false allegations, used various papers to make false allegations against Arthur Scargill, the extent to which MI5 and the security services were involved in destabilising the National Union of Mine Workers. So all these things, these were all big events as I was growing up.
Would you say that is obviously the backdrop, Kevin, to your university life, made you a bit more determined in your politics and then in your writing in later years because of what you grew up surrounded by, obviously, especially going to university, like both I and Patrick have, with a backdrop of Tory rule throughout the country?
Yeah, very much so. But for the sort of household that I grew up in, which was defined by Catholicism and left-wing politics, I think it was probably broadly similar to thousands and thousands of other households throughout West Central Scotland. And in a household like that, your faith complemented your politics, and your politics complemented your faith. There was a practical application of your faith into the field of politics, about recognizing that you had been born male, white, fairly privileged in that we live in an affluent country, access to an education, access to a health service, and realizing that you'd won a life's golden tickets. And you could use these opportunities to obviously to try and better yourself and make the most of the chances that you'd been given, but also there was almost like a moral duty to use it whenever you could to highlight and inequalities by people less fortunate, which is the kind of one of the main broad themes running through Christianity and the Catholic faith. So I know that a lot of people get a little bit edgy when you talk about faith and politics and how the two shouldn't really mix, but in a household such as ours, it was, they both complemented each other. They were both dynamic, active forces, which went way beyond just saying prayers, singing hymns, making political slogans.
You're talking there about a definite link between faith and politics. all three of us are Celtic supporters. Do you think there's a link between football and politics? Do you think there should be a link between football and politics? And do you think, as a Celtic fan, Celtic fans are inherently left-wing, inherently, charitable, keen to help the working man because of the founding of the club and the roots that it was born in through Brother Wilfred?
You've got to be careful here, because Celtic are a political club. There's probably a few others, but I can't think of any other club in the world, possibly Barcelona FC, whose foundation and whose raison d'etre is so suffused with politics and the social challenges faced by the people that support them at the time when they were founded. So people who say to me sport and politics shouldn't mix, well, maybe in some circles, but Celtic are a political club. It was founded in politics, and it was founded by the societal challenges faced by the people it grew from, and the memories of those challenges. And actually, for quite a lot of current generation of Celtic fans, those challenges still exist. These are important, and I'm always struck by how each generation of Celtic supporters carefully kind of passes that on to their children, that almost like they're giving them a gift. And it's about wanting to see your team do well, but more important than that is that your team, your club still represents your community, and that's okay. And it's a positive dynamic. But we also need to be careful to acknowledge that as Celtic have become more successful, especially in the 60s and 70s, it began to attract many thousands of people and their families who are not from that tradition, and who just enjoy watching Celtic because of the not just the things they stood for, but the way that they played football, or because of the talents of individual players, and their support is just as legitimate and real and valid as those of us who've had it handed down to us from our Irish forebears.
Seeing the modern game, Kevin, which has obviously changed so much, there's a lot of greed and wealth in modern football, and we spoke there. I think we would all agree that there is that link between Celtic and politics that we've all grown up with. But in the modern game, how do you think football clubs can reflect that link positively? From the perspective of the club, obviously Celtic Foundation do a lot of good work in communities, and that that spirit of Brother Wilfred's kept alive. As a fans group, the Green Brigade do that with food bank collections and stuff. But in terms of a corporate board, do you think they can do that, or is it just a case that whatever board you'll have, unless there's some sort of kind of fan-led board there, that will just never happen, because at the end of the day, football has changed so much and there's so much greed and wealth in it that the reflections of us as supporters will never really be held within the boardroom.
Yeah, there's it's quite a complicated nexus of relationships and connections between the Celtic supporters and the custodians, the board of directors at any given time. I mean, the Celtic Charitable Foundation does amazing work, quite a lot of it quietly, in donating to good causes, but not just good causes that are close to the hearts of the Celtic supporters. And that has grown very much alongside the kind of corporate ethos of the club. And we've got Fergus McCann to thank for that, because before Fergus came, for many decades, the Celtics linked the its kind of charitable foundation was quite thin, it's quite slender, and it was, wasn't really happening. And one of the great things that Fergus did, apart from literally save the club, put it in a sound footing, which has been the base of all our recent success. The other great thing that he did was establish this charitable foundation, and to say to the fans that this is, I'm making this part of our DNA again, if you like. The problem with the corporatism in football was that, no matter how working class or left wing or radical the majority of the Celtic support might be, we're all, and I include myself in this, we're all willing to overlook the fact that the board is quite reactionary, sometimes treats the fans with contempt, is quite right-wing in its makeup. As long as we beat Rangers, as long as we finish ahead of Rangers, because Rangers are the only club that we need to finish ahead of to win anything in Scotland. And even the start we've had to this season, effectively we've beaten a team, Dundee, very well by playing very good football, but it's a team who will probably struggle in the relegation zone at the end of the season. We've beaten a fairly unheralded Czechoslovakian team who we would normally have been expected to beat. And we played well against Hearts at the weekend going forward, but maybe I'm just being pessimistic here, but I would think that any of our future opponents looking at that defence would think, you can give Celtic as much of the ball as you want, but any high ball into the box is going to give us an opportunity to score. So I don't want to get too carried away, but the way that the Celtic support has reacted, we're only ever 2 or 3 games, a 2 or 3 game run away from everything that's hunky dory. But there are still some issues, I think, that need to be addressed at board level. Quite apart from the fact that, like any other organisation, if you get too many people running it who think that they're there as of entitlement, they're there for as long as they want, there's no scrutiny, there's no accountability. No matter how good these people might be, no matter how successful they might be in business, that's not healthy for any organisation. And I still have problems with the fact that a club like Celtic, with its support base, still doesn't recognise trade union membership. It still doesn't sign up to the Living Wage Foundation. I know that in recent years it has conceded that point and is paying its lowest paid workers an official, a rate that is similar to the living wage. But in order to do that, it deprived a lot of these workers of their annual bonuses that they'd come to rely on for the last 10 years. And, we've got a chief executive who last year or the year before made more than £3 million in a year. And I saw some Celtic fan on Twitter say that probably no player in Celtic's entire history or manager has earned that in a single year. No matter how good Peter Lawwell is or any other chief executive, that I don't think that that's what Celtic fans would expect of a club, especially with the values that we're supposed to have. There's still too much that's unknown. We don't there's no communication. We went nearly 4 months without appointing a manager, and there was nothing coming from the club, not even an acknowledgement that there might be an issue here. And you wonder that if we'd taken steps seriously to start appointing a successor to Neil Lennon sooner, then we wouldn't be starting the season with a very, very makeshift defence, which was ultimately responsible for knocking us out of the Champions League qualifiers, as seems to be the case quite a lot over the last few years.
Every single year.
I mean, we've got, the money's there. The money's not a problem. It used to be that Celtic, might not have been able to compete financially, but thanks to the reforms that Fergus put in place, and also thanks to the good husbandry of Lawwell, money isn't a problem when coming to address that. But there doesn't appear to be a kind of sophisticated strategy, and I think there was also a complacency running right through the club, and it also affected the fans and me, that Rangers would always be where they've been recently, that they would never recover, and that why do we really need to do too much, because Rangers aren't very good, and why spend millions building a great team when you're a shoe-in for the title, and maybe once every 4 or 5 years we'll get into the Champions League group stages if we get a favourable draw. Well, the wheels have come off that at a really crucial time, because next season the winners of the SPL get straight into the group stages.
And get a big prize pot as well.
So Rangers recovery, okay, it kind of remains to be seen if that will last. And I know that they've had problems at the start of this season. But given our experience over the last few years, we would be very, very foolish in dismissing them just because they've had a bad start. So it's this could all have been avoided, I think.
100%.
We should be looking at that automatic place next season with a lot more certainty than we are at the moment.
And treating it like it's the £30 million that it's actually worth, and not
Yeah.
penny pinching over players in the transfer window. Aye.
Yeah.
And I'd agree with you in the £3 million for Lawwell last year on an annual wage. And I think I remember Ian Bankier, the chairman, getting an invite to a Theresa May Christmas dinner in Downing Street. I don't know if he went, but I remember he got an invite. And I think it's pretty staggering that a chairman of Celtic would be invited to a Tory Prime Minister's Christmas dinner.
Yeah.
We're all loyal to...
Hopefully his totties were burnt, Patrick, though. He didn't get the good portion. Aye.
We can all talk about our loyalty to Celtic, but going back to politics, we're all independent supporters, I believe. How strong is your support for independence at the moment, Kevin? How long have you been an independent supporter? When were you first convinced of it, and why?
2013, I remember writing a column for The Observer, where I said that I was beginning to be persuaded by the arguments for independence. Having been, a Labour supporter and a soft unionist, in that there are more kind of important things to worry about than whether Scotland's independent or not, like multi-deprivation, inequality, affects the rest of the UK as much as Scotland. We're the same people as people who are encountering these issues in Manchester and Birmingham and Liverpool and Newcastle. These are our people as well. They've suffered from the same unequal arrangements that exist in this country. But I began to see that we were entering a territory in UK politics which was coming to be dominated by a kind of particularly nasty fill your boots, profit at any cost philosophy at Westminster, and that the Labour Party was increasingly unable to oppose this and increasingly unwilling, apart from that period when Jeremy Corbyn was in charge. And that an independence at least afforded us the opportunity to kind of reset, start again, and build a society on much fairer, much more socially just but morals is probably too strong a word, but just ethics, philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm not, I'm not absolutely wedded to independence. It's still my preference. I'd still like Scotland to be independent. But if it never happened in my lifetime, I'm not going to lose sleep over it. It's not as if Scotland is Scotland's playing host to an occupying nation who've got us under the jackboot. We're not talking about emerging Eastern European democracies after the Soviet era. England's England. It's not as if our closest neighbours are Ceausescu's Romania. It's jolly old England. Yes. We know loads of English people. We work with them. They contribute. 450,000 of them, I think, contribute greatly to our economy. Tens of thousands of Scots work in England. Mm-hmm. So I don't see them as enemies, as occupiers. I just think that I'd like to see Scotland have the opportunity of arranging its own affairs and spending to a different set of priorities. But lately I've become very disenchanted with the SNP, not the wider Yes movement. But I think the SNP are in the process of blowing it and have become increasingly strident, paternalistic, dictatorial, and alienated from the concerns of many of their members and many of their supporters, many independent supporters in the wider Yes movement. And
Sorry, I was just going to ask, you said you wouldn't lose sleep if Scotland didn't become independent, and in that time since 2013, you mentioned Jeremy Corbyn. Had Jeremy Corbyn won the general election in possibly 2017, do you think your support for independence then would have wavered because there would have been a government in number 10 that, you spoke about social justice and putting things at priority, as you said, that we share values with people in Manchester and Liverpool and Leeds or wherever? Do you think your support for independence at that point would have probably went? Because once again, we'd have a Labour government for the first time in 7 years, one with a person at the front of Labour, very different from what we had probably from the 1970s, because obviously Blair's Labour very, very different to what Corbyn's vision of Labour was.
Yeah, it's a good question, but I think I was so far down the route of independence, you kind of, what it's like. You start embracing the ideas of independence and the culture, and you get to know a few of the people involved, who have been fighting it for their entire lives and for whom it is very passionate. So it's a difficult thing to just ditch once you've embraced it. So yeah, I really like Jeremy Corbyn, but I still want an independent Scotland. Happy to be very friendly, cooperative terms with the neighbours, but
you wouldn't have mind moving out of the house, because at least the neighbour next door is going to get looked after now.
Aye. I keep saying to unionist friends, who talk about the apocalypse that will happen if we become independent, that England will still be our affectionate, much admired, close neighbours, and if ever England was in any trouble, as we usually have done over the years, we'll help them sort it out. We'll be there. And we will continue to be a place that's welcoming to English people and English workers, and hopefully England would always be welcoming to Scottish workers.
Yeah, hopefully. Patrick will come back. This happens quite a lot. He drops out. He spoke about the SNP becoming a bit alienated from the base. Why do you think that's happened? We've had Jerry Hassan on, and Jerry spoke about the SNP, basically turning those voters from red to yellow. Could the SNP be in a state where they're getting that complacency that Labour had, that they know that the vote in any election now will just hold up, and that the SNP of 2007 is now very different to that SNP of 2021 after 14 years of government, and it just became, like what we were talking about with Celtic earlier on, a board or a government that just becomes too comfortable within itself and doesn't want to push things, like we've saw on drug deaths, for instances, which is, for 14 years has been terrible, and eventually action is going to be taken, but 14 years too late of government.
I don't think I might be naive here. I have to keep believing that the leadership of the SNP want independence as much as I do, but they seem to be disguising it quite a lot. I'm deeply disappointed by the performance of our MPs at Westminster. When you see the likes of some of them, who's the guy who used to play in that awful band Runrig?
Pete
Wishart. He's going to be deputy speaker, and you're going, what? I'm not even convinced SNP MPs need to be at Westminster. I mean, what a statement that would be if the SNP fought the next Westminster elections and made it clear that if they won, they wouldn't take their seats. That would go around the world, and it would be a massive statement of intent. But the impression I get is that because of the bounce in 2015 following the referendum, I think the SNP get 56 seats out of
59, 56.
Yeah. So there were dozens of total unknowns there. I know for a fact that SNP strategists and party managers were in a bit of a blind panic because they didn't know who some of these chancellors were. and nothing in the last few years has suggested that anything other than that some of them are chancellors. They're not very good. They're earning the sort of money with the sort of lifestyle and perks that their talents would never command elsewhere in life. And they've become quite disdainful of the kind of grassroots. You see them on Twitter. The people that they dismiss as the common weal types, i.e. the people that go in all the marches, and the people that propose radical policies to address issues such as drugs deaths in our poorest communities, inequality, multi-deprivation index, which finds the same communities occupying the same top positions as they did 3 years before, and 3 years before that, and 3 years before that. But meanwhile, you see the party managers expending a lot of energy on things like hate crime legislation and the Gender Recognition Act, which just have next to no bearing on the lives or improving the lives of the people in the communities that have to have their lives improved. And it's almost like they've created this, they've weaponized it in order to avert people's gaze and to use it to silence critics, especially women, who are not in the least transphobe, some of whom have campaigned and stood up for the rights of minorities, sexual minorities as well. And they dismiss them as transphobes and bigots simply because they are highlighting reasonable and legitimate concerns about the sex-based rights of women. But instead of engaging with them and addressing these concerns in a grown-up way, all they do is use hate speech against them, alienate them, marginalise them, intimidate them. And you wonder what the reason is for that. Because some of the most aggressive of these people, you very rarely see them talking about independence. So you wonder what's their main target. You know, is their main aim an independent Scotland, or is it to construct, you know, almost like an experimental state, you know, a world leader in trans rights, a world leader in clamping down on free speech, or the correct sort of speech, just having the correct sort of speech. And you wonder why they think that's enlightened and progressive, when to the vast majority of people out with the political bubble, people at my family and a lot of my friends who don't understand this, who live their lives wanting to be open and generous to everybody, and to always oppose any sort of discrimination, and to make them feel that they are thick, stupid, and have problematic views. I wonder why they're doing this, and just hope to achieve, because from what I see, it's alienating a lot of decent people, and they might get away with that over a 5 or 6 week election, when you've got a very weak Labour Party and, you know, a pretty stupid Conservative Party, and while you're dangling independence in front of them. But if we do get a second referendum and it's conducted over 6, 7, 8 months, and there's much more scrutiny of the entire UK press, and you've got the entire UK political establishment lined up against you, those sorts of views, that sort of extremism practiced by these people will be exposed, and will turn potentially an awful lot of people off who we need to vote yes to become independent.
Just quickly going back to two things really. The SNP MPs not taking their seats at Westminster. Would you say that? Would you advocate for that in a sort of Sinn Féin way, where under no circumstances they take their seats, or would they be open to interpretation should a figure like Jeremy Corbyn be a couple of seats away from a coalition, and then the SNP could negotiate a confidence in supply where they get a referendum in return for a coalition for a few years?
Yeah, you know, that they could use that. Yeah, confidence in supply. They could have an understanding if it was looking like a properly radical Labour Party was in the dim and distant future. If it's going to gain power, yeah, you'd need to be quite adroit. But I just don't see that happening.
Not for a long time, anyway.
Unless you ditch Keir Starmer. I mean, you've got a Labour leader who thinks people like Ken Loach shouldn't be in the party.
But people like Tony Blair should.
You think, well, why are they even calling themselves a Labour Party? It's not a Labour Party. It's a kind of, I don't know, it's a social democrat, wishy-washy, kind of yellowy social democrat who who
willing to sell their soul to get
hunt
into
with the
power.
hounds, you know. And I think I can see Starmer's thinking that, as happened with Tony Blair in '97, eventually, no matter how good or bad Boris Johnson's administration turns out to be, eventually, like, politicians, voters in England will just say, well, like, I think it's just time for a change. For no other reason that we need a change.
Yeah.
And as long as the guy who they're changing to isn't scaring the horses and kind of looks and talks and feels like the last guys, then we'll have him. So Starmer's thinking, I just need to just
be as inoffensive as possible.
Yeah, and just be here and look businesslike. Not that any of the recent polls in the last year would suggest that. You would think that a Labour, a half-decent Labour leader would have made a lot of inroads into the Conservative Party lead. But the only difference is that it's actually only within the Conservative Party that there's movement or pressure being applied on Boris Johnson. It's not actually affecting the overall numbers for the Conservatives. There's just a few Conservative politicians who are beginning to think that Johnson's a fool and he's an embarrassment and he needs to go. And it's maybe now say because Labour are so weak, they're looking at Labour and thinking, right, well, we might be able to jettison this clown without it having any effect on our numbers because Labour have been so useless for the last 2 years.
Did you have a second part to?
Aye, just to ask you about the sort of you're saying you're disenfranchised with the SNP about some of their priorities, what they're saying at Westminster. They're maybe not pushing hard enough for independence. Would you say that your sort of your base, your goal is to sort of try and prevent poverty, try and prevent homelessness, try and give everyone a better life? And whether it's Leave or Remain, yes or no, Labour, Tory, SNP, you're quite fluid. You're willing to move to any party. You're not putting all your eggs in one basket.
Yeah, I still broadly believe that an independent Scotland can foster those values more than if we're in the UK. In terms of party politics, I'm not beholden to the SNP. My preference would be if the Labour Party in Scotland ditched its bizarre opposition to a referendum, I'd happily vote for them.
Even if they didn't support independence, maybe they'd sort of be open to a referendum. And
they were open to a referendum. That would be enough for quite a lot of people, I think, who have migrated to the SNP. But I couldn't vote for the SNP at the moment, especially if they're serious, especially if they conclude a deal with the Greens, Scottish Greens. Under no circumstances would I go anywhere near that party. I don't have any truck with Alba either. I do think it's an Alex Salmond vanity party. I think he should have packed up and gone after the trial in which he was acquitted of all charges, of course, because frankly, some of his admitted conduct in the course of that trial and prior to it was outrageous and taking the piss, basically. And it might not, of course, it didn't reach criminality, as we now know. But it's not remotely what you would be expecting or what the people who voted for him were expecting him to be doing in Bute House with other employees, whose careers he was responsible for. And I think he should have shown humility and walked, written his memoirs, done a lecture tour. So I couldn't have anything to do with Alba. There's another party, kind of little party, Restore Scotland, who've got a few SNP refugees who are kind of, they share my broad concerns about Europe, but immediately and automatically rejoining the European Union. They're quite left of centre. They've got a kind of Christian ethos, although I'm at pains to say I don't really think Christianity or the church should be interfering in secular politics. But when I say it's got a Christian ethos, it doesn't seem to be as aggressive in any way towards people of faith, of any of the Christian faiths. Whereas I think there's quite a toxic, poisonous strain of the SNP at the moment, which are very aggressively antipathetic towards what we would call mainstream Christianity or faith, Catholicism in particular.
On that point, Kevin, Catholicism leads us really onto this point, both I'm practicing Catholics. In September, there's going to be 34 orange walks walk through Glasgow, and one day, with an SNP council at the helm of that council, in any other country, would that be allowed? Because if it was, anti-Semite walking through the streets, it wouldn't be allowed. If it was, another form of racism, which is what it is, there's no point using this as false language of sectarianism, because we all know it's racism. Do you see any path to this changing? Because everybody obviously thought years ago, when the SNP first came into council, it's something fresh. We've had Labour for such a long time that things will change, but it's just the same old story.
I've got kind of interest in viewing this, which has evolved, I suppose. I think, having seen at close quarters the serious different type of anti-Christian, anti-Catholicism operating within the SNP by people who have real power and real influence, I hesitate. I wonder whether the Orange Order can be considered our serious enemies. I think there's a much greater threat towards, for instance, Catholic schools or the free practice of our faith by certain secularist, humanistic influences within government than there is with the Orange Order, who, let's face it, don't have any influence in civic Scotland. Others might disagree with that and say, well, actually, there's still discrimination. But if there is, I haven't seen it in the jobs market. It's not pleasant watching so many people marching in your own city, and the atmosphere can be quite hostile. But the Orange Order, these are working class people who, for different reasons than us, have felt alienated, marginalised, cut out of political processes, who live in the same communities as us, who have the same levels of unemployment, and who have been cut out of access to influence in this country, and they see the Orange Order and Rangers Football Club, I suppose, by extension, as two of the sort of constants, the two forces in their lives that haven't let them down. When all the other pillars have collapsed around them in their communities. I think the Orange Order strategically have probably made a mistake here in going for 34 or so many, because if they want to remain relevant, or if they want to remain a thing in these communities, I'm sensing as much as you are that even secular Scotland, who are no friends of ours, are beginning to get sickened by this as they realise, what it stands for, and that it just makes them feel a bit edgy. And if you want to take these people with you and not antagonise them, and if you want it to be one, a different culture, or one culture amongst many of the others, why have so many all in the one day? Why have so many anyway over the course of late spring, all of summer, and early autumn, as we've known for years? Why do so many of them choose routes that take them past Catholic churches? So that, it's over the years I've come to live with them. I don't see them as a particular threat. The Orange Order itself would say that it's not anti-Catholic; it's a celebration of Protestantism and Protestant traditions. So if we're being an enlightened, progressive nation, as we say we are, then that has to include even kind of old-fashioned traditional manifestations of Protestantism. I mean, a lot of unionist Protestant friends that I have, they've had the traffic held up when they see massive independence marches. Now, I know you won't get as many pro-independence marches or anything like it, but some of the big ones, you could pop into the pub for half a dozen pints in the afternoon and still come out and they'd still be marching. So I don't think we should take our eye off the ball with what's really happening here, and the threats that we have to our way of life and to our faith and beliefs, which I don't think are coming from the Orange Order. I think they're coming from something more concealed, more insidious, more influential than a few thousand working class people marching up and down singing about King Billy. It's
insignificant sort of thing.
I'm not saying I'm comfortable with it. You still get a bit of a chill sometimes.
Yeah.
But I know people. I know there's a guy where I live who's quite an active member of the Orange Order, and a more pleasant, happy, non-threatening, gentle person you couldn't hope to meet. Absolutely die hard for the Gers, of course, and never let you forget it. And you have to, if you've been an optimist and you're being kind, you have to assume that there's many more like him in the Orange Order. But I don't think they're anything like a threat to us. And the biggest risk to them, I think, is just overplaying their hand and having 34 marches in 2021 Glasgow. It's not so much risks pissing us off, it's pissing off the secular people who just don't like the look of it or what they think it says about modern enlightened Scotland. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Aye. Just finally for me, before we wrap up, getting towards the hour mark, you're saying about the tactics to sort of, you don't think the leadership of the SNP are particularly keen on independence, or they're not showing that they're keen on independence. MPs possibly shouldn't go to Westminster because there's not a lot of point. The Tories have got an 80-seat majority. What would you say? What should the dominant, which is the SNP, what should the dominant pro-independence party do to try and get us closer to the point of independence that the SNP aren't doing just now, which is basically sort of asking for a referendum and then not getting one, and then sort of crossing their arms?
I think the first thing they should do is find a way of reinstating Joanna Cherry as a senior influential figure in the party and giving her a front bench position at Westminster. Or failing that, getting her up to Holyrood and getting her into the cabinet, because if the party is going to be serious about independence, it needs to be talking about currency. It needs to be talking about post-independence relations with England, arrangements around the border, and also it needs to be looking and exploring ways through the courts of finding a way to leverage some influence on or with Boris Johnson and his obstinacy over even granting a referendum. And Joanna Cherry's got that. She's the only Scottish politician who knows the taste of defeating Boris Johnson in the courts through the prorogation in 2019. She's got a massive brain, and she's also respected by English politicians. So if she's doing your negotiations, to try and bring them to the table, they're kind of, you've already got a bit of respect, but that's all about people close to Sturgeon not wanting. They don't want her there because she's a challenge. She's a potential challenge to Sturgeon's leadership because she's good. But all those things, even beyond that, you take away the Joanna Cherry factor. I can't believe that there hasn't been work done on a currency. Under no circumstances can we be entering the next referendum campaign without a clear plan on currency.
Do you think that was missing in Andrew Wilson's growth report commission?
Well, Andrew Wilson's growth commission was out of date almost as soon as the ink had dried. Within a few months, Nicola Sturgeon was literally saying that, because we're talking about immediately going back into Europe, but by his admission, that's not going to happen for 10 years. And there's no way that Europe's going to look at us without without our own currency. They're certainly not going to look at us if our currency is still wedded to hated Westminster because of the toxic way that the post-Brexit negotiations were conducted by Johnson and his cronies with Europe. So there doesn't seem to have been any work in that. I've seen nothing about how, given that everybody has seen how problematic the Irish border question has been. Well, the same thing, we want to avoid that if we're in an independent Scotland when negotiating with England, because if we don't have answers for that at the moment, then those who are prepared to consider independence but need to be persuaded, these are the questions these people will ask, and I haven't seen any work done by the SNP leadership or its strategy, unless there's a report and they're hiding it and they're coming out. But I'm not hearing anything on that. And these things need to be in place before a second referendum. And there has to be work done on somehow persuading the Johnson administration, even if it's through the courts, of granting Section 30. And I don't see it. So you have to then that's when you start getting paranoid and thinking, are they serious about this? Or are they just happy with the salaries, the pensions, the nice cars, the non-executive roles in their favourite lobbying firms when they get parked out, But because I'm a kind-hearted soul, I choose to believe that they're still 100% for it.
But as you say, those are key issues: currency, borders, especially if you're going to pick up floating voters, especially if unionists are that wee bit, if you could nail those, I think you would, as you say, probably bring a lot of people over. Last thing for me, Kevin, I'm going into 4th year of journalism and politics, starting in September. Just to ask you, what do you think the current state of journalism is like in Scotland, and what kind of direction do you think we're headed in the next 5 years in terms of between print, digital media, and other things?
I think journalism's fine. Journalism is words. We will always need the spoken and the written word. It's just the platforms that are beginning to change a wee bit. There's still a future for newspapers, for newsprint. The newsprint has to be alive to the challenges. Not even see them as challenges, but working with operators of other platforms such as this one. Some of the best journalism, some of the best writing that I've seen in recent years is happening in blogs. And I love the fact that there are platforms such as this. I love the fact that there are people such as yourselves who are using this as a non-traditional route into doing journalism. And that is ultimately the future. And I think the big newspaper groups need to embrace that, as some of them are doing up to a point. And I think some of my own colleagues need to be a bit less disdainful and a bit less kind of superior in their attitudes towards the so-called, blogosphere, and just need to get over themselves and get their fingers out their arses, and stop being elitist about it. And see if newspapers don't survive. I mean, there will come a time when we just won't be using paper, obviously. The word will get out. The word is still required. People still are speaking, listening, writing, reading words, thoughts, concepts, ideas. Malfeasance and corruptions will still have to be exposed. Campaigns will still have to be waged against inequality, against wars, illegal wars, and you need words to do that. And as long as they're there, there's journalism. So I'm quite chilled about it.
You made me feel a lot better about myself, and at least I know I can get a coffee with you if I ever get a job at the Herald.
Well, things are better. Things are better for you guys than when I was your age, because at that point you had to go through a very narrow means of selection to get anywhere near working in a title. But now your calling card, your CV is this, which is open to all. You've got your own audience. I mean, I know people who are doing blogs who wouldn't, if they were given a decent offer by the Herald or the Daily Record or the Daily Mail, they would just thumb their nose at them and say, no, actually, I'm making a bit of money out of this. I'm getting decent ads. I'm reaching an awful lot more people, and I'm getting to write what I want to write or say what I want to say. So, keep doing what you're doing. You won't go wrong.
Thanks very much, Kevin. I think that's all for this week. We'd both just like to thank you for joining us. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks very much for asking me.
Hopefully we'll catch up in the studio, because I'm sure we could have spoke to you for a long
Yeah,
time.
it'd be great. I really was loving the idea of coming over to Dalkeith.
Yeah, we've all sought that.
And feeling that, it's about time I made the return trip to Heritage.
Yeah. Well, you're more than welcome. You're more than welcome. Yeah. If you come in, there's definitely a Guinness on me. So
Waiting for you.
Yep. Kevin, thanks for joining us. Thanks to everybody who's tuned in this week. We are hoping to get David Pratt, who you mentioned earlier on the show.
I get
the
David.
Next couple of weeks. He is busy though, so
David loves the jersey. He kind of likes the jersey. He's all right. He's all right.
But yeah. Thanks for joining us, Kevin, and thank you to everybody for watching the